Hey everybody. Well, welcome to day 2 of my free training. So this week I am going through and just giving every day a simple tip or strategy that you can start to incorporate right away to help you, whether you're trying to make some health changes, just trying to eat better, whether you're trying to lose weight. So yesterday we talked about slowing down. So step 1 was mindful eating, slowing down, paying attention. And then today we're going to talk about the other side of that mindful eating, which is how to handle hunger. And there's kind of 2 main pieces of this that I want to give you to kind of walk away with, 2 main things to keep in mind. So the first is that hunger is not an emergency. And the second one is I'm going to teach you kind of how to know when it's time to eat and when it's time to stop eating so that we don't overeat or undereat, right? So I'm going to teach you the hunger scale that I use with my clients. It's really, really helpful. That gives you this tool so that you can really kind of figure out for yourself the right times and kind of use some intuitive eating along with that slowing down and being more mindful, okay? So I've got some notes here on my computer. I've actually got a blog about this, so I will link that below. If you're able to jump on live, say hi. If you watch the replay, say hi as well, and I would love to hear from you and say hi back. Okay, so let's talk about hunger. When you think about being hungry, what comes up for you? What do you think about, right? I think in a lot of ways, the diet industry, the health industry has kind of done a disservice in marketing certain diet programs and saying that like, you can lose all this weight and never feel hungry, right? Or you can do this diet and never feel hungry. And when I first start working with clients, one of the things we talk about right off the bat is hunger. And I tell them, listen, this is kind of part of the deal and it is totally okay. It's not a big deal. And I'm going to teach you how to manage it. Because I don't know about you, but for a very long time, I felt a lot of fear around hunger, right? And so some of the thoughts I would have, some of the things that I was taught and was actually teaching to my clients and teaching to my students were things like, hunger is an emergency, hunger is gonna take over and I'm not gonna be able to, think or function, I'm not gonna be able to concentrate. Hunger means that, my body's gonna interpret it that I'm in like a time of famine and it's gonna shut down my metabolism and it's gonna hold on to all my fat stores and it's gonna eat my muscle, right? Because it's starving. So I had all these beliefs about hunger, and so every time I would feel any amount of hunger, I would feel kind of afraid and I would eat, right? I would respond. And so hunger was kind of driving, really not even hunger, the fear of hunger was kind of driving the ship, so to speak, right? And I know a lot of other people that feel that way. They may have beliefs about, blood sugar levels dropping and not being able to concentrate and, not being able to, do the things they want to do because hunger is going to take over, right? So a lot of those beliefs are actually really not true. And so once we kind of understand what's going on, why we experience hunger and how to manage it, then we can kind of take back the reins, so to speak, and make healthy decisions for ourselves around what we want to eat, when we want to eat, okay? So what is hunger? Hunger is really just a physiological request from your body for a quick fuel source, right? So our body can get energy from one of 2 ways. We can either get it immediately from the foods that we eat, right? We can eat some carbs, fats, or proteins and get some energy, or our body can access energy internally by breaking down the fat stores that we have. Now that's true for everybody, whether you are at your ideal weight, you're not, you're underweight, all of us carry some amount of fat on our body primarily as a energy reserve. And our body's kind of always pulling from immediate energy and from stored energy. And our body's really well equipped to do that. So you think back to like caveman days, right? When you couldn't just go and open the refrigerator. You had to go out and like find your food or kill your food or harvest your food. It was important that our body was able to go through periods of time where we didn't eat and be okay. So we have this sort of built-in system where if we are going a couple hours without eating, going between a meal, it's totally fine, right? It's not anything that we have to necessarily be afraid of, okay? So again, our body is able to break down. There's actually this process called lipolysis where it's actually able to break down the fat that's stored in our fat cells and use that for energy. Totally natural. Now, the problem is if we're constantly eating, we don't really give our body a chance to shift into that state, right? It's kind of like, think about a fire, and it's like putting a piece of paper on the fire, and then you have to put another one, you have to put another one, you have to put another one, versus putting a couple logs on the fire and allowing some sustained energy, right? So it's good to have both. We want to eat, we want to fuel our body, but it's also okay to go for periods of time when we aren't eating. And even though our body might prefer some quick energy, if we don't give it right away, it will then turn to those internal sources. It will dine in, so to speak. I use the example sometimes, it's kind of like the difference between going through the drive-through and cooking a meal at home, right? Go through the drive-through, it's really fast, but it may not be the best, whereas cooking from home, might take a little bit more time, but you have more control over it, right? You might get a more nutritious meal. So again, not to say that you don't ever want to eat, right? Of course not, but your body is really well equipped to be able to handle those times, okay? So again, one of the things that's really important is to think about what your thoughts are about hunger and decide if you do have some of those fears about it, and then really understanding what is going on. So again, some of the examples I hear from people is they're afraid if they don't eat, their blood sugar will drop. Now, that can be the case, but true blood sugar drop issues are really, really rare. Obviously, if it's something you're concerned with, you should talk to your doctor about it. But it's one of those things we kind of have in our head of, like, we associate hunger with blood sugar drops, and most of the time that's not really actually what's going on. Again, I won't be able to focus or get my work done. My metabolism will slow down. I'll hold on to fat. My body will eat my muscle, all of these things. Now, keep in mind, there is difference between allowing some hunger and starvation, right? We don't want to go into disordered eating or starving ourselves. And that happens more from not giving our body the nutrients that it needs over time, more so than allowing for some breaks, some really digestive breaks where our body is able to turn to the fat stores that we have, burn that for energy. Now, when our body gets used to turning to fat stores for energy, this can actually really be beneficial for us, because when it's able to do that effectively and efficiently, there's some really great benefits. A lot of people report feeling more energetic, more mental clarity. Obviously, weight loss can be a big part of that. So again, go back to the example I gave of the fire. If we're constantly feeding, paper on the fire, we never necessarily give the fire a chance to burn up those logs. And that's what we want to do for our body. We want to kind of give it both. We want to give it a chance to experience and get the ability to turn to those fat stores, to dine in, so to speak. Now, one of the things that's interesting about hunger, when you experience it, first of all, just sort of notice it and observe it. Notice how it feels in your body. And one of the things that's really interesting is you'll notice that it comes in waves. So like I said before, I used to feel really afraid that it was just going to get worse and worse and kind of overtake me and I wouldn't be able to handle it. But it's really interesting to watch. So hunger will come, and then if you don't respond to it, it'll actually go away, right? Then it might come back again and it'll go away. And so for me, one of the things that I do is I notice that when those waves of hunger get more and more frequent, that's when I start looking at the hunger scale and deciding if it's time to eat, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So one of the best things is just to, instead of feeling like you have to respond immediately, just observe it, notice it. Again, a lot of my clients will report, I started to feel some hunger, I had some water, gave myself a little bit of time, and it completely went away. And, I didn't feel hunger again for another hour or something like that, okay? So the other big thing that happens when we allow a little bit of hunger is that we also allow our insulin levels to drop. And I'll talk a little bit more about this tomorrow with the what the bleep should I eat, where I'll talk really about what foods are beneficial to eat. But with insulin is primarily, it's a storage hormone, and it's really storing up extra blood sugar. But in that process, it also is telling our body to store up fat, and it's preventing our body from really being able to access fat stores and burn that energy. So again, when we allow our bodies some periods of time when we're not eating and to experience a little bit of hunger and those insulin levels drop, we are able to teach our body, again, how to access some of that natural fuel that we already have on our body. So again, we'll talk a little bit more about insulin tomorrow, but that can be a really benefit of allowing some of that hunger. Okay, so over hunger versus normal hunger. So keep in mind that when you first start like on a weight loss journey, most likely, depending on the foods that you've been eating, some of those hormone things that I talked about have been a little bit out of whack. And so you might in the beginning experience a little bit of over hunger, right? In other words, your body's like, what are we doing here, right? There's a hormone called Gremlin, which is the hunger hormone. And it's been shown that when we reduce calories initially, that hormone is going to release more. It's like, feed me, right? So again, it's just something to be aware of, and it's something that, you can plan for, and it's something that, again, you can just kind of observe and understand, but it's not anything to be afraid of. So if you know that this is going to happen, it might be that we're planning more, small, frequent, healthy meals to help with that. But as you start to balance out your hormones, as you start to see those insulin levels drop, you should also see those hunger levels start to decrease. You should start to feel it kind of normalize a little bit more. And what most of my clients talk about is experiencing a lot less hunger. Hey, it just started intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting is a big part of that. So I don't start people on intermittent fasting, but if they're going to do that, and I don't think it's for everybody, I'll do a whole nother episode on that, but I have a lot of clients that have had success with intermittent fasting, and what I want to do first with them is stabilize those hormones, right? I don't want to throw them into it necessarily right away. So I usually will spend at least a few weeks helping them get on a cleaner diet so that their body's already in that fat adapted state, burning fat for fuel, and that makes intermittent fasting so much easier. But a big part of intermittent fasting is that you're eating a certain type of diet that helps you to burn fat for fuel. So how long have you been doing it, Chris? I've done it as well, and I kind of follow an intermittent fasting schedule, and I personally really like it. Again, some people, it's not for them, but there are definitely a lot of benefits to it. Okay, the other thing, and this goes back to, observing our hunger, is really understanding the difference between physiological hunger and psychological hunger. This seems really simple, but it's really hard. I know I still struggle with this, right? It's like I'm hungry when really I'm not hungry, right? I'm just craving something, right? On Friday, I'm going to talk about cravings and urges and how to manage those. And the way I think of it is cravings are more of those physiological cravings, and then urges are more kind of mental and maybe a little bit more of emotional eating. So I'll talk about how to manage those two things because it's a big part of it, right? Like if it's just about eating healthy and we don't ever have any urges, if we're just eating purely for fuel, we would all be exactly where we want to be. But obviously that's a big piece of it. So just paying attention and understanding the difference between physiological hunger and psychological. So physiological hunger, you're going to experience actual physiological feelings, right? You're going to maybe be, your stomach might be growling, right? Or you might actually feel that in the stomach area. You might even have, like I put here, sometimes even a little bit of light nausea or lightheadedness, right? Could start to occur. Now, obviously we don't want to get to the point where we're not feeling well, but those are things I would say, oh gosh, I really do need to eat. Now, the way you know if it's physiological or psychological is, would a plain chicken breast solve the problem, right? If you're like, yes, absolutely, just give me some chicken, I'm good. That's when you know it's physiological. Usually when it's psychological, we have a very specific thing that we're wanting, and it's usually something that is going to release some dopamine, right? And so I'll talk about that a little bit more later as well. But dopamine is this brain chemical that feels good, and it also drives us to move towards things that give us pleasure and comfort and things like that. So, okay. I'm going to come back and read your comment, Chris. That's good. So usually when we are more in that psychological hunger. Gosh, I do this all the time. I'm like, oh, I'm really hungry for some cookies. And then I'm like, wait, I'm like physically full. Like when I take a second and like pay attention, I'm like, no, I'm actually physically full right now. It's so crazy. But our brain will trick us. And it's like, no, we're definitely hungry, right? When it's really more of a psychological hunger. And, you know, that's totally normal. Like, I don't know anybody that doesn't have some amount of emotional eating. I think so many people hear emotional eating and they think it's like this big bad thing where we're like hiding in the pantry, like, you know, secretly eating the entire bag of Oreos. And I don't think that's really what it is. I think everybody to some degree, unless you're just eating purely for fuel, right? Which maybe there are some people that do that. We all at some point eat for pleasure. We eat for different reasons, and that's okay. It only becomes an issue when you feel like you're acting against your own will, or it's getting out of control, or it's getting to a point where you feel like there's some consequences that you don't want. And then that's when we can explore that a little bit more. But just being, again, aware and conscious. And then what you're doing is you're shifting from your more primitive brain, the dopamine that's like driving you towards it without thinking, to your prefrontal cortex, where now you're like, oh, I'm wanting these cookies because, and then you can make a decision if you want to continue. And it might be, yes, I do, but you're more likely to not overeat if it's coming from the prefrontal cortex, if you're consciously thinking about it, than if it's just this thing where you are being driven by those dopamine centers, right? And that primitive brain. Hey, Lisa. Hey, Shelly. Okay, so psychological hunger versus physiological hunger. I already talked about hunger versus starvation, right? So again, we are not trying to starve ourselves. Again, starving yourself is when you are not giving your body the necessary nutrients that it needs over the long haul. That has bad consequences, right? That's when we're getting into disordered eating. We don't want to do that. That is not what I'm talking about here. What I am talking about is that we are just allowing for some periods of time, we're giving our body a digestive break. We're allowing our dopamine and our insulin levels to drop so that our body can become fat adapted, meaning it's just burning fat for fuel, which is a normal thing that all humans do and has a lot of great benefits to it, right? So again, we don't want to not give our body the nutrients that it needs. Even with intermittent fasting, like Chris mentioned, the idea is not that you're eating less. Now you might by default, but it's just taking the amount of food you would normally eat over a longer period of time and putting into a shorter period of time so that you have a longer period during the day when your body isn't having to digest and those hormones aren't being released. That's really all it is. So again, I'll do a whole episode on intermittent fasting because I know a lot of people are interested in it, and I think it's a great tool for a lot of people. I don't think you have to do it to lose weight or to be healthy. It's just another one of the options that are out there. Hey, Megan. Okay, so let me show you guys what I use. Now, with precision nutrition, when we're talking about actually eating our meal, what they recommend is that you stop at 80% full. And obviously that's somewhat subjective, but the idea there is that you're satiated, but that you're not stuffed, you're not, full. Now remember, it takes about 20 minutes for your stomach to tell your brain that you're full. So we want to be eating slowly, we want to be paying attention, and then we want to stop at about 80% full. For some people, that might be a little bit confusing. So I like to use this hunger scale. I'm going to show you guys. Let me turn my thing here. Okay, so this is what I use with my clients. And sorry that I'm going to have to kind of go across. Again, I will put a link below for you guys so that you have access to this whole thing. But what you can see here is you would see 0 is just kind of neutral. You're not really hungry. You're not really full. You're not really thinking about food at all, right? If we go down the hunger scale, we start to experience some hunger. What I usually tell my clients, if you're trying to lose weight, you can allow yourself to go as much as a -4, so moderately hungry. Once you start getting up to a -6 or so, that's when it gets tough to make good choices and eat slowly, right? That's when we start to really feel that hunger and tend to just gobble up whatever's near us, right? So -2 to -4. And then for eating, for fullness, for weight loss, again, between a 2 and a 4. So we're just eating enough to feel satiated without necessarily, feeling super full, right? Now, keep in mind, fullness is a very comfortable feeling. And so we have to retrain our body and retrain our brain. So if you're used to eating to the point where you're really, really full, to not feel really full at the end of a meal can feel a little bit scary. But again, remember, you can always go back and eat more, but you can't necessarily, well, you can't go back and take it back if you've overeaten. So that's what I always tell my clients. Listen, if you're still hungry in 20 minutes, by all means, go back and eat some more if you need to. But typically what will happen is they'll realize, oh wait, I'm actually satiated. Now, the other thing I want to mention is that when we eat food, even healthy food, there is a release of dopamine in our brain. And this is such a good thing because otherwise we would never eat and we would die, right? So dopamine is being released. And remember, dopamine doesn't just feel good, but it's driving behavior. So when you get done eating, especially if it's something you're enjoying, that dopamine is still going on. It's still happening in your brain and it's still telling you to eat more. And so again, just like with hunger, if you just give it a minute, it'll actually dissipate. So again, start with what you think is a good portion for you. Then understand that when you get done eating, you may still feel like you want to continue eating. If you give yourself about 10 minutes, let that dopamine dissipate, let the stomach tell the brain if it's full, then you can make a decision if you want to do more, if you want to be done or whatever. So that can be just kind of a helpful thing. What I personally try to do is I try not to ever let myself get super hungry, but I also, since I learned this, I'm just not scared of hunger. Like it's just not a big deal to me anymore, right? I notice that it comes in waves. I allow it to come. And then if I start to get to that -4, I definitely try to eat. But for me, I really try to keep it at about a 2 or a 4 on the hunger scale so that I don't ever feel unpleasantly full. And then again, just kind of listen to my body and give myself some space, some time throughout the day to have digestive breaks so that my body can learn how to shift into that state of fat adaptation and just to have those insulin levels drop down, okay? So hopefully you guys will find that helpful. Again, hunger is part of the deal, most likely, especially if you are trying to lose weight or make some sort of diet change like intermittent fasting or something like that. It's not necessarily something we have to be afraid of. It's definitely something we can manage with some good tools. And again, what I'll do is I'll share the link to this whole blog and the hunger scale with you guys below in the comments. But if you have any questions, please type them below. Let me know. Shoot me a message if you want to. I'll be happy to answer them for you. Thanks y'all so much for jumping on live today. And if you watch the replay, same thing. Feel free to reach out, ask me any questions. Tomorrow I'll be talking about what the bleep should I eat. So if you're like, what in the world? Like, I don't know which diet to follow, which foods I should be eating, what foods I shouldn't. I've got a whole really good handout that goes through all the different foods, different categories, and really kind of explains everything. So I'll get a little bit more into hormones and dopamine and all that tomorrow and explain how that relates to the foods we should eat, shouldn't eat for health and weight loss and all that stuff. So y'all have an amazing day and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.